I'm not one of those airplane enthusiasts who collect model planes and paint them by hand. In fact, the first time I ever stepped in a plane, I jumped out of it at about 12,000 feet. And I didn't do that because I hated the aircraft, but I don't know, it was just a plane to me. Now, what that means is, one, I have no regard for my safety or well-being, and two, all the poetry and romance of flying through the clouds in these beautiful machines, it's kind of lost on me. I just don't care. And that's relevant because that's a big part of this game's appeal. This is Birds of Steel. If you're into aircraft, well, this is right in your airspace. If not, this is the most boring game you'll ever play in your life. Released earlier this year, Birds of Steel is a game about flying and shooting, but it's really about aircraft and history. The game takes place during World War II, and it's kind of like an ode to the aerial war machines that define that era. If you're a buff for the history of military aviation, Birds of Steel is really special. It revels in the topic with more passion and detail than any video game I've ever played. But if you're not into that kind of stuff, all you're left with is the gameplay, and to me, that's a bit less interesting. Birds of Steel packs a lot of features and content and history into what is otherwise a fairly pedestrian flight simulator. There are 3 difficulty levels, but even on the arcade setting, things are pretty simmy. That is to say, slow. Flying your plane, which is done by subtly steering rudders and wing flaps, is as much the focus as anything else, and obviously, that's not for everyone. And the content is as detailed as the gameplay. There are more than 100 actual planes in Birds of Steel, and each model is just meticulous. This really is a game for the people who can, lecture you on an airplane just by looking at it. And frankly, I didn't care about that aspect of Birds of Steel, but as a political buff, I did really appreciate its history.
There, I hit the target.
Birds of Steel is a game with a well-defined niche. This is a flight simulator for console gamers who are also really into aviation history, and objectively speaking, it delivers. It's got more than 100 planes, a strong campaign mode, there's even an editor that lets you design and customize your own missions. So if you're into detail and simulation, Birds of Steel is for you. Taking 10 minutes to land though? Not for me.